Okay, we are live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. We this morning are going to take testimony on H113, an act relating to lakes in crisis and requirements for that designation. We have a group of witnesses who have coordinated among themselves, who have grown a little bit. And so I just want to be clear that we also are going to hear from DEC after we hear from you. So we need at least, you probably have 40 minutes, 35 or 40 minutes this morning. And folks may have questions for you too. So please keep that in mind as you get through your testimony. So welcome, Peggy Stevens. I believe you are going first.
Thank you, Amy. And good morning to the committee, Chair Sheldon, Co-Chair Labor, and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony on H113, the Lake in Crisis Bill that was introduced by Woody Page and sponsored by a broad bipartisan array of representatives, including many sitting here today. My name is Peggy Stevens. I live on Echo Lake in Charleston in the watershed of Lake Memphremagog. I've been an active volunteer member of Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity, or DUMP, since 2019, and an active advocate for water quality protection since 1983, when my family made Echo Lake our home. I was initially involved with the Echo Lake Protection Association since '83, but my interest in water quality has expanded to include the entire Memphremagog watershed. I invite my colleagues to introduce themselves quickly. Polly?
I'm Polly Jones, and thank you for having me. I'm going to be very brief. I've been working on water quality issues with Lake Memphremagog since about 2020 and have been actively involved in environmental advocacy through that entire time. John?
John, you're muted.
Hi, I'm John Barrows. I live in South Burlington. I was very active in the first Lake in Crisis bill in 2018 as I was a camper at Lake Carmi. I was the president of the Franklin Watershed, which includes Lake Carmi. I was the founder of the first watershed committee at Lake Carmi in 1993, and have been a water quality activist since then. My interest in Lake Memphremagog came to me since my stepson and his family, 3 kids, live in Holland, Vermont, and they understand the situation at Lake Memphremagog and choose not to swim in Lake Memphremagog, but go to some of the other beautiful lakes in the Northeast Kingdom. And I also taught school in Coventry, Vermont, the town that hosts the landfill. So I'll stop there and thank you.
Thank you, John. Joan?
Yes, hello everyone. First, I want to thank you for having me today. I'm a volunteer president of Memphremagog Conservation. I am Canadian. I live on the shore of Lake Memphremagog. I've been working with the MCI since 2008, but MCI has been living since 1967, and our mission is to protect the watershed of Lake Memphremagog and its water quality. And one of our many actions is looking at possible solutions of pollutions. And we've been working with Mrs. Peggy Stevens and with the team of Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity. Our association with DUMP signed the amendment concerning the sending of the leachate into Memphremagog's watershed. And I'm glad today that you're giving me the opportunity to share our concerns here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. So this bill, H113, is critically important to all of us Vermonters, especially those of us living in the Northeast Kingdom, and to our Quebec neighbors as well. Lake Memphremagog faces many of the same issues that once threatened Lake Carmi when it was designated a lake in crisis, such as rising phosphorus levels and the increasing incidence of cyanobacteria blooms. However, Memphremagog also faces environmental challenges unique in Vermont, foremost among them the dangerously high levels of PFOS and PFOA in 4 species of fish tissue, as well as the cancerous fish found nowhere else in Vermont and only ever in contaminated waters. Many PFAS chemicals are found in residential, commercial, and industrial settings, and they escape or are discharged into our waste stream and environment and cause permanent harm to our health and safety. H13 will eliminate the criteria of property values and include controls on discharges of effluent into Memphremagog's many tributaries. This is crucial because, as you know, more than 175,000 Quebec residents rely on this lake as their drinking water reservoir. Could we see the next slide, Polly?
Just a moment.
Okay, well, until it arrives, the next slide is a map of the watershed and focusing on the vicinity of the lake itself. What the map illustrates is that while let's see, virtually 5 miles of the over 25-mile lake is present in, is in the, if you look at the map on the left, you see that most of the lake, 3/4 of it lies above the US-Canada border, while 3/4 of the water in the lake is contributed from south of the border, the watershed of Memphremagog, which includes 7 significant lakes, many ponds, 5 rivers flowing into the lake, all from the US side of the border.
I would show my face if I could. It's not that I haven't brushed my hair today, but unfortunately my camera is not working. So
Okay.
these 3 pictures are of this is a recent cyanobacteria bloom along the bike path in Derby Bay. This is certainly evidence of our lake in crisis, evidence of contamination by an overload of nutrients. Now, the blooms have extended the entire length of the lake. This is not an isolated incident. Our lake was declared impaired by the ANR Lake Scorecard years ago, precisely for this reason. Cyanobacteria, as I'm sure you know, is toxic to humans and animals, and it signals a clear danger to our health and safety. And they're primarily caused by nutrient overload and runoff, which has been exacerbated now by climate change in the form of torrential rain, flooding, and rising temperatures. Now, this is a concern about our farmlands spreading manure and sewage sludge, or what's called biosolids. And they contribute to the phosphorus overload in the agricultural runoff, which increases the cyanobacteria blooms. Now, in addition to the nutrient overload, biosolids, which I will stick in here, have no beneficial use, contribute to dangerous chemicals, including PFAS in significant amounts. Since 2019, 31 out of the 34 locations where biosolids were applied have shown PFAS contamination in groundwater. It should be noted that even after leachate ceased to be disposed of in Newport's wastewater treatment facility, PFAS have been detected at the point of discharge from between 17 and 27 parts per trillion. The other 3 wastewater treatment facilities that discharge into the watershed have not been sampled for PFAS yet, but it really stands to reason that they are also emitting contaminants.
Hi, am I ready to go?
You're ready.
Okay, this is John Barrows. I'm going to talk about the brown bullhead in Lake Memphremagog. Finding cancerous lesions in fish is a very rare occurrence in the United States. Brown bullhead are an indicator species. They are the canaries in the coal mine. As many people have stated, the health of the fish in the lake are a good indicator of the health of the lake. State and federal studies have proven 35 to 45% of the mature brown bullhead throughout Lake Memphremagog have cancerous lesions. There are also non-cancerous lesions on other fish species in the lake, especially the bass. As one state biologist stated, the fish are sick. The state of Vermont has a team of researchers working to solve the mystery of the cause of the cancerous lesions on fish since 2017. Included on this team is Dr. Vicki Blazer, an expert on the subject. I'm going to just paraphrase some of her comments on the brown bullhead. There's a likelihood that the cause of the cancerous lesions are multifactional, the result of exposure to one or more chemical contaminants that might be in combination with a virus or genetics to produce tumors in the liver cancer, in the skin or liver. Among chemicals showing significant associations to malignant melanoma are PCBs and PAHs, PHA. I do want to comment that the DEC will be following up after our presentation, and they will be giving testimony. I would guess that there's no need for Memphremagog to be a lake in crisis since the state is doing a good job with Lake Memphremagog currently. And I do have to give them credit. In the last 10 years, there's been more water quality improvements than there has in the 50 years prior. So I want to give credit where credit is due. They have been working to greatly reduce the phosphorus in Lake Memphremagog with some success. My immediate concern is the return of the leachate into Lake Memphremagog. There has been a moratorium on leachate going into Memphremagog since 2019. That will expire at the end of this year. As you know, there's a pilot project to remove some of the PFAS and PFOS in the leachate, but leaving many other PFOS and PFAS remaining and other contaminants. So I believe the state is prepared to treat the PFAS on site at the Casella landfill in Coventry and dump it into the Black River, and that which goes right into South Bay of Lake Memphremagog. And that is my greatest fear. And we have a lot of information that shows that is the case. And I think that's an important question to ask DEC. Is that going to happen? And what are their plans for the leachate in the future, especially in the next year or two? Thank you very much.
So I'm going to push on and talk about the other fish, including the brown bullhead. So whether from leachate and groundwater in air emissions or discharged from wastewater treatment facilities, PFAS levels in the tissue of Lake Memphremagog's fish population are also alarming. When you read the average concentrations of PFOS in fish tissue above each picture you see here, note that the nanograms per kilogram are equivalent to parts per trillion. This is not generally how fish tissue, the PFAS in fish tissue is measured. It's usually measured in micrograms per kilogram, but I've converted it to parts per trillion so you can relate it to our drinking water standards. And when you look at that number, you do not want to eat those fish. So the EPA has designated PFOA and PFOS as hazardous chemicals. You already know that. You've been hearing about PFAS for weeks. We know that there is no safe level of exposure. We feel the public should be warned about the significant concentrations, and then they would be better able to make informed decisions about whether or not to consume the fish from the lake. H113 will call attention to these ongoing studies, as John has mentioned. The brown bullhead melanomas and these PFOS levels in fish tissue. I just want to let you know that my family maintains a catch and release policy. We enjoy the thrill of the catch, but we do not eat the fish in the lake.
So I guess this is my turn now. This is a picture of our 2024 newsletter at MCI, and where we promote all our actions. And we produced this map to show our members and all the people who are reading our newsletter the importance of looking at specific sources of pollution and so we see on the map, we see the watershed, Memphremagog's watershed on the left, and in the middle of the picture, you see the size of Lake Memphremagog's watershed compared to the size of Vermont State. And I do not want to repeat what my colleagues have said about the importance of drinking water, the many signs of deterioration, the known pollution sources. I just want to highlight that what I've seen in this bill that could be passed today, that you have sufficient and logical arguments to pass it on. And I want to emphasize on the fact that you have this environmental justice, which is called the Act 154, concerning that it aims to protect communities from disproportionate, sorry for my English, environmental burdens, including polluted air and water, climate change, and limited access to green spaces. So it means that knowing that the people living in the watershed of Memphremagog represents 6% of the population of the state of Vermont, they are having to support the burden of all Vermonters. On top of that, garbage from other states around. And by having this lake in crisis bill passed, you would also acknowledge the importance of applying this Act 154 concerning the final destination of leachate, which is not a potential, but it is a source of pollution. And my testimony today, I want to show that by passing this bill today, you would show a mutual respect. I'm not.
Can you?
Yeah.
I think it would help if you could turn your video off. We're losing your sound.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll be able to hear you better now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do you want me to start over where you had?
No, we heard. No, it was just the last few sentences, like last two sentences.
Okay. Last sentences. I was saying that by passing this bill today, it would show a mutual respect between our two countries, Canada and US. By adopting this law, you would show that Lake Memphremagog is important to both our nations. It would strengthen cross-border relationships and cooperation to protect this vital resource, clean, safe, and potable water. By passing this lake in crisis bill, you could demonstrate that protecting the water quality environment of Lake Memphremagog, that is a priority that transcends economic considerations related to property values and prioritizes above all the health and safety of our international environment, our people, our fish, and wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you all. So closing to the committee, we are here today to ask for your help and leadership in moving this bill through the legislative process to passage. once the Lake and Crisis Bill has been passed out of this committee and adopted by the legislature, which we fervently hope it will be, then the real work will begin. Passage of H113 would support efforts to protect international Lake Memphremagog from further environmental degradation, even without an immediate allocation of funds. A Lake and Crisis designation would impanel a critical action planning committee comprised of stakeholders from both sides of the border, including individuals, municipalities, business community, legislators, and other elected representatives to identify priorities and set goals. It will raise awareness among lakeshore property owners and municipalities on both sides of the US-Canada border to implement any and all best management practices to reduce runoff, which contains any number of contaminants. It will demonstrate, as Joanne has so eloquently said, Vermont's respect for Quebec citizens whose drinking water comes from the lake. And I believe that exceeds 175,000 people now. It will protect our regional economies that rely greatly on the lake's natural beauty for tourism and recreational value. It will highlight the necessity of implementing BMPs throughout the entire watershed. And this is a process that's already been promoted by our agencies, but could be expanded, especially with help from the populace once we are educated. We would improve eligibility for state, federal, and private grants to municipalities profits working to restore water quality. It would uphold the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty, which requires both countries to prevent cross-border environmental harm. It will compel and encourage Vermont state agencies already involved to take even greater action to address PFAS pollution in air, soil, and water, as well as contamination of any kind from any source. And it will, as Joanne also has spoken to, will support environmental justice for the Memphremagog watershed. Critical action planning will be the first step. By coming together, we, the people, can make a difference for the people, for the fish, for the wildlife, and for the lake region. Lake and Crisis designation will shine a light on the problems and the solutions that will prevent further contamination and eventually restore our beautiful waters of Lake Memphremagog to health. Thank you very much to the committee, and now we can take questions.
Thank you for your testimony today and your care and concern for Lake Memphremagog. Do members have questions? Representative North.
Yes, thank you very much for this informative presentation. One question, I understand what the bill H113 currently says, which is to put a designation of the lake in crisis on Lake Memphremagog. And I also understand your end goals of cleaning up the lake, but what do we expect to be the direct effect, the most immediate current effect of declaring the lake in crisis? What's your expectation of that immediately causing? Because obviously just declaring a lake in crisis doesn't just immediately clean up the lake. There's a lot of steps that have to occur. What's the expected immediate effect?
May I, folks? I think the expected immediate effect will be the raising of public awareness, literally by the announcement that this designation has been made, that the lake is in crisis, but that we have an opportunity to turn it around, that it is not a hopeless situation. Unfortunately, Lake Carmi's designation came too late. We need to be proactive. We need to acknowledge an existing problem that has been well proven. And then we need to acknowledge the fact that we, the people, and the municipalities most immediately involved and concerned have a role and a responsibility to play in protecting the lake from further contamination and degradation. John?
Yeah. So what the Lake and Crisis plan would do, the state would be required to come up with an action plan. It would make Lake Memphremagog a priority amongst all the lakes in Vermont. It would be a clear focus on Lake Memphremagog. The state would be required to do an annual report, have regular meetings with the constituents. At Lake Carmi, it worked very well. We went from having a moderate level of improvements to a very high level of improvement, including the governor's office. Became a real high priority, and a lot of action was taken. A lot of action didn't work out, but at Lake Carmi, it really made a difference. It became a #1 priority for the state of Vermont in terms of the lake and water quality.
May I
Okay.
add something?
Yes, please.
Yes, Joanne?
Yes, thank you. I don't know. Okay, thank you. Maybe you are not aware, but Memphremagog was given a well, so you will hear me. Are you hearing me?
That's better.
Yeah, we,
Better.
Okay, I
better with-
shut down. Sorry, I had to shut down the camera. I was saying that Memphremagog Conservation got a mandate from the International Joint Commission in 2019, and we published a report concerning Lake Memphremagog and all the phosphorus on its phosphorus state. And we have written many conclusions, many things that should be in phases. And I feel that passing this bill today would help to get the money to get into action. And we have, I will not state all the information that is in our report, but it's pretty complete. And of course, in this report, we didn't talk about the Coventry situation, but it's really important to look at the whole situation. We have many signs of a deterioration of the water quality, and we have to look at sources of pollution and to solutions. This is what we did in our report. And of course, all our actions afterwards concerning the final destination of the leachate has to be considered too. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
yes.
Hi, yeah. At Lake Memphremagog, the state has made it a concerted effort and done a very good job of reducing phosphorus going into the lake, causing the cyanobacteria. There's still a lot more to be done with legacy phosphorus. This will continue. The problem will continue for many years. Again, with the Coventry landfill, the Casella landfill, the state has really not been forthcoming and has not really telling us what their plans are with the future leachate. So that's an area where the state, I feel, has failed. And with the Lake and Crisis designation, I feel there will be much clearer communication and much more outreach by the state. And I think that will be a much higher priority and have higher visibility. Thank you.
Could you expound a little bit on what that better communication would look like from your perspective?
Sure. Well, at Lake Carmi, we started having regular meetings. There was a really, really good, clear communication on what they were going to do. Since the Lake and Crisis designation for Lake Carmi was in 2018, they received literally millions of dollars for the lake aeration system. And even the farmers in the area received a great deal of funding to reduce phosphorus coming from their property. The Lakewise program progressed. They did a lot more with the shoreland homeowners for water quality.
Sorry, I guess I was. You mentioned specifically that the communication around leachate hadn't been adequate. I thought
Oh, I'm
you said
sorry.
that.
Yes, I'm
I'm
sorry.
curious, what does better communication look like from your perspective?
Well, an acknowledgement of what they're going to do. So now the information right now is very vague as to where the leachate is going to go next year or the year after. So when Kate speak this better, but when there's a pilot project to take out like 4 of the PFAS from the leachate. And then it's run through different wastewater treatment plants in different locations since there's a moratorium. For 20 years or so, it was dumped into the wastewater treatment facility in Newport and went directly into the lake with really not taking out any of the PFAS or any of the other chemicals. So we don't know what they're doing, and they won't tell us basically what the future plans are. And the fear is they will take the PFAS pretreatment at the landfill, and it'll go directly into the Black River, which goes directly into the Lake Memphremagog. So that's the fear.
And
Yeah,
if I may, just the present concern also being that the leachate treatment, the pilot has been incrementally being built on site on the landfill with the present permit in place does not, it in fact would not bar the pilot just morphing into a permanent leachate facility. It also doesn't bar the potential for import of leachate from other wastewater treatment facilities, including from out of state. So we are looking at the, very great potential of the increasing amount of leachate being brought to the landfill, which I believe you all are well aware is in a very precipitous place hydrogeologically. And I guess I wasn't really planning on talking about all of this today, but there's no harm. I guess one of the great concerns is the possibility, as we have heard discussed in the past, of the leachate being discharged directly into the Black River. The lead scientist of the technology that is now being employed to treat leachate, David Burns, is quoted in a research article as saying that there should be no mistake that the effluent from the leachate treatment technology be considered potable water, and that it should never be discharged or allowed to migrate to a drinking water reservoir. The knowledge that we have is the reason that we are so concerned, and the reason why we would like to know more about the future plans that so that we might respond in kind and effectively.
all right, thank you. Representative Austin.
Yes, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm just wondering, because the lake is also on the Canadian side, is there an effort with, let's say, something equivalent to the Agency of Natural Resources that is working in collaboration to look at, how Canada will help to implement some of your concerns or actions?
Maybe I can answer part of the question. We had a dump site on Lake Memphremagog's watershed on our part of the border. We closed it down in 2010 because there was pressure from the residents around the lake and from the city of Sherbrooke and the city of Magog and the city of Potton, who are taking their drinking water from the Lake Memphremagog. So this is part of this is very specific action that was taken. On top of that, we have implemented lately what you call in Vermont the Lakewise program. We're participating actually on many actions on our side of the lake, on the Lakewise actions. I could talk about also our concern from the cities, but you would have to ask City of Sherbrooke and City of Magog and Quebec government and Canadian government to tell you more about their action. I'm not a politician. I'm a volunteer president of Memphremagog Conservation, but we represent many people from our side of the lake, and we share all the concerns that my colleagues are sharing with you today.
And Joanne, if I may add, in addition to closing the landfill that was in the watershed, the leachate from that landfill, which of course continues to be generated, has been trucked out of the watershed for disposal ever since 2010. So, if we consider that, an appropriate reciprocal action might be to close the Coventry landfill and continue to ship the leachate out of the Memphremagog watershed. I know that is a bold statement to make.
Oh, go ahead, Polly.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody in your room understands, and I don't know if we said it, that the water flows north. So the watershed is huge on our end, and we supply 75% of the water that reaches over the border, whereas Canada has 75% of the lake.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you again for your testimony and for joining us this morning. You're welcome to stay in the room. I'd just ask you to mute yourselves while we hear from DEC.
Well, I would like to thank you all on behalf of our little cohort here for taking the time and offering this opportunity. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate your work too. All right, Ben Copans. Please.
For the record, I'm Ben Copans with the Department of Environmental Conservation, and thank you for having me here. Kind of found out about this morning, so don't have anything real formal to present today, but really appreciate the opportunity to just say a few words. So my role within the Agency of Natural Resources is a watershed planner. And so I've been working up in the Lake Memphremagog watershed for about 15 years, focused on water quality issues. And in that role, I was responsible for pulling together the total maximum daily load for Lake Memphremagog. That's really our game plan for how to reduce phosphorus loading to the lake. And I also produce tactical basin plans, which we update every 5 years, which really are our game plan for how we implement that TMDL. So it allows us every 5 years to take a look at our success in those efforts, to identify areas we can adjust and to kind of make some adjustments in our efforts to implement the TMDL. So in terms of this lake in crisis bill and some of the distinctions between maybe Lake Carmi and Lake Memphremagog, I think Lake Memphremagog is a little bit of a different situation, where most of the watershed that's part of this basin in Vermont that we produce the tactical basin plan for goes into Lake Memphremagog. So we do have a pretty robust structure for doing planning around that basin scale. So another point I wanted to make is just that.
Can you just say that again?
Yeah.
You might have.
Yeah, so we produce in Vermont basin plans for 15 basins around the state of Vermont. And Lake Memphremagog is part of Basin 17, which includes the Lake Memphremagog Basin, as well as the Tombaphobia and Quaticook rivers that all flow north into the St. Francis River. So the vast majority of that watershed flows into Lake Memphremagog. So the tactical basin plan, a main focus of that tactical basin plan is identifying how to implement the TMDL and really working with partners to think about how to best do that.
But how is that different from Carmi? That was what I needed you to say.
So Carmi is just a much smaller watershed. So it's part of, I should know the basin, but it's part of the Missisquoi Basin. So you have this much smaller watershed in a much larger basin. And so when you're developing that tactical basin, it's a little bit hard to get into all of the details of what needs to happen at the Lake Carmi scale. So I do think it's a little bit of a different situation, where having a real focused effort at that Lake Carmi scale is a little bit different than Lake Memphremagog, where we have this planning process that really a main focus of that planning process is on reducing phosphorus to Lake Memphremagog. So I think another point to make is just that there is a lot of funding that's dedicated to Lake Memphremagog right now. So we have, we're in the process of implementing Act 76. And so we have the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, which is our clean water service provider. And so they receive about $750,000 a year to focus on reducing phosphorus to Lake Memphremagog. In addition to that, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department gets about $500,000 of Great Lakes Fisheries money, which is focused on fisheries and water quality improvements. And we also have a large slug of money that has gone to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board focused on Lake Memphremagog water quality improvement. So that's about $3 million that's been focused on that effort. And in addition to that, our department has worked closely with the Orleans County Conservation District for a specific RCPP effort to focus on agricultural water quality reductions, really tied into our water quality sampling. So really working with individual farmers, doing water sampling, working to implement projects where we see elevated levels of nutrients. So we have a pretty robust structure around trying to reduce phosphorus loading.
That's, well, kind of want to let him finish his thoughts, but I don't know where he's going.
Yeah, so just a couple more things. I do want to just mention that we have a group that meets twice a year called the Quebec Vermont Steering Committee on Lake Memphremagog. And so this is really the venue for collaboration across Quebec and Vermont, and we do collaborate quite closely on a number of things. You know, we worked really closely with the province of Quebec in terms of developing the TMDL. We needed to use a lot of the lake data up in Quebec, as well as their tributary data, to really understand how the lake would respond to our nutrient improvements up in Vermont. And, you know, I guess the other thing just to recommend, I think you have gotten some testimony on the annual performance report, but I think that's a really useful document just in terms of showing the tracking and accounting and how much phosphorus we've been able to reduce in the watershed. And we all know that reducing phosphorus to Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog is really a long-term effort. There's a lot of different work that needs to happen, but in the tracking and accounting, you know, we have a target reduction of about 15 metric tons, a little more than that. In our tracking and accounting shows that we've reduced about 2.6 metric tons. So, and you can see a pretty significant up ramp in that process. So we have a long way to go, but I think we're making some pretty significant improvements through that effort.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Chapin.
Can you just articulate all those funding sources? Are they all annual every year or some of those one time?
Yeah, so the Great Lakes Fisheries money that goes to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife has been an annual slug of funding. So that's $500,000 a year. The Clean Water Service Provider funding of $750,000 is an annual amount of funding.
How much?
That was $750,000. And the money to the Vermont Housing Conservation Board was a one-time $3 million slug of money.
Directed at Memphremagog.
Directed at Memphremagog, though. Yep.
So I get that your job is to focus on the nutrients and the watershed basin planning work, which is fabulous. But we just heard testimony on the PFAS and the Coventry landfill and the different type of contamination. And I know perhaps we'll have someone else in from your shop. Maybe you can even just suggest who that is, or we'll reach out to DEC. We've had Secretary Moore in on what's happening at the landfill, at the leachate, to treat the leachate, and that we can revisit that for members just to know we can have them back in to update us again on what's happening now to address it. But I'm curious, are you aware anywhere in the country of a TMDL that addresses, you know, chemicals of concern, emerging contaminants like the PFAS and PFOS? And that's my one question, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not aware of one, but there certainly may be some out there. I think in the context of some of the known sources, you know, we generally don't do TMDLs where we have, you know, if a lot of the pollution's coming out of a wastewater treatment facility, you wouldn't necessarily do a TMDL. And I think some of the challenge with PFAS is we don't necessarily know where it's all coming from. So that's a good question. I can kind of reach back out to see if someone else has some examples of a TMDL like that.
And then the other big thing I think I just heard in the testimony before this is a fear of the unknown, a fear of what's happening. And as I said, we did take testimony from the secretary about what they're doing, and I'm wondering about improving communications with the members of Don't Undermine Memphremagog's Purity, and how we could address that. Since in fact, and you're in some ways I don't need you to get ahead of yourself. sincerely respect the fact that you learned about this morning and that you have come to share what you do in the watershed. But it seems like you're a communications person in a lot of ways. That's what your job is coordinating projects and communicating. And maybe there's some thought that could be put into better communications with folks who are interested in the other pollution in the lake.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I know there's through the Act 250 process, there is a group that meets twice a year that does try to support some of the communication on the landfill. So I think that is one avenue for some of that communication. And I know in the past we've used the Quebec Vermont Steering Committee as another avenue for communication. But yeah, it's a great something I can kind of bring back to folks within our department to see if there's some other avenues to improve that communication.
And then I'll do one more and then get to others. But the lake in crisis on Lake Carmi was focused on nutrients, which also would have been part of the larger basin planning effort in that watershed. And I guess could you update us on what's going on there? And my sense is the aeration. I know the aeration system didn't work. So what's happening now?
Yeah, so right now we're kind of moving on to the next phase of work, which is looking at an alum treatment for the lake. And I think that's in my role. I worked on a much smaller one on Tickle Naked Pond, which is down in my region. And it's been a very effective treatment process. You really bind up the phosphorus in the bottom sediments. And so I think it's a really well-proven method. And I think we've got some funding lined up that's kind of unique to support that work. So I think we're working pretty hard to try to pull that together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Representative Labor.
Thank you. Ben, this question is directed to you. In the planning of your Memphremagog Basin, are there any farms currently applying septic to perimeter properties that would be close to a watershed that would end up in Lake Memphremagog?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. So that's something I can see if there's some information on the application of septic. So I just don't have that information.
Biosolids. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. I was wondering that too. Representative North.
Yeah, question, Ben. Thank you again for your presentation. It's a short notice for it. So given that we're already spending, and I don't mean already as in like spending too much, but we are have been focusing some spending, $750 million a year, plus another $3 million one time focused on Memphremagog, and we already have a Lake Memphremagog tactical basin plan in place. What would, if this bill were to pass, what would declaring the lake in crisis designation for Memphremagog obligate or enable the state to do beyond this, what's already being done?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I should know a little bit more about the lake in crisis designation itself, but I actually, since I don't have a lake in crisis in my region, I'm a little unclear of the specifics, but from what I heard this, today and what I understand, there would be a requirement for some annual reporting and pulling together a separate committee that would be focusing on that. So it sounds like those would be the main implications. And I guess from my perspective, working up in the watershed, I think another more immediate consequence is maybe to further add the feeling that the lake really is in crisis, that people shouldn't be swimming in Lake Memphremagog. And I just want to say that when you look at Lake Memphremagog and the water quality data that we have for Lake Memphremagog, the water quality is actually pretty good relative to a lot of other lakes in the state of Vermont. So we do have cyanobacteria blooms. Our nutrient levels are going up, but are hot elevated. They're not going up, but they're at 18 to 19 parts per million. So that's high, but nothing like St. Albans Bay or Missisquoi Bay or Lake Carmi. So Lake Memphremagog is, a very clean lake relative when you look at lakes across the country. And so I would really hate to communicate further to people that they shouldn't be swimming in Lake Memphremagog. So no, you shouldn't be swimming if there's a cyanobacteria bloom. But aside from that, the lake actually is an amazingly clean water body given its watershed. So I think that's my biggest concern. And I think you find some members of the community up there also concerned about kind of the messaging around declaring Lake Memphremagog a lake in crisis. So certainly we have a lot of work to do there, but I don't think it's outside of some of the challenges we have on many of our lakes around Vermont.
Representative Labor.
Thank you. This question is more directed to the Canadian side of the lake. We know DEC is testing the south end of the lake. It's maybe Joanne could answer this. But I'm sure there must be a Quebec counterpart equal to our DEC testing the water up there. Do we know what the PFAS level is on the drinking water side of the lake?
Yeah, and so I should have, again, didn't have much time this morning to prepare, but I know we have done quite a bit of PFAS sampling, and we did a collaborative effort. And the levels of PFAS in Lake Memphremagog, I think we had one detection in one area of the lake out of quite a bit of water quality monitoring that was done. So, you know, the levels of PFAS in Lake Memphremagog are very low. Again, any PFAS is a concern, and we're certainly not suggesting, I think across all of Vermont, we're concerned about any PFAS that we see in our lakes, but Lake Memphremagog, based on our water quality monitoring, both in Quebec and Vermont, does not have particularly high levels of PFAS relative to other water bodies across the state.
Thank you.
And I see your hand, Joanne. Please feel free to speak up.
Thank you. I'm just about to leave the meeting because I have an appointment, but I would like to add something about the fact that, yes, Mr. Coppens is right about the fact that the lake compared to other lakes is not so bad. But the thing we have to look at today is what is our legacy for future generations when we know the importance of the environment, when we know the importance of the side deterioration of the water quality, the fishes, the cyanobacteria bloom. Of course, you don't want to send the message that do not go in the lake anymore, but it's just the fact that having the lake in crisis bill adopted would put a light into the Lake Memphremagog's consideration and situation concerning of its source of pollution. We're talking of, yes, about all the efforts that are being done by Vermont State with the with the lake-wise actions and so on, which is wonderful. I'm not saying that. You're saying, and we know the fact that the Coventry dump site has a large effect on water quality. If you're asking, do you have PFAS in water intakes in Lake Memphremagog on our side of the lake? Of course, there is some PFAS levels, but do we have to wait until the levels are too high? Do we have to wait until it's too late? Because once it will be too late, we will not be able to go back. Just look at the quantity of, I'm sure you have heard about the contamination of wells surrounding the dump sites and the contamination of the wells surrounding the well of Newport, which is filled with arsenic. Part of the reason why the Newport facility did not want to treat the leachate because it would put more pressure on its water intake. So we have to take under consideration the future. What do we want to hold for our future generations? And you have this power in your hand, and I just wanted to highlight that. And again, I have to go, but I wanted to thank you for having me today.
Yeah, and we need we need to wrap up too. I see you, John, but Peggy's hand was up first, so I'm going to call on Peggy. You're muted still.
I'm sorry. Look, I just want to respond to what Ben said about the PFAS levels in Memphremagog. They are actually measurable, and while they might not be as bad as somewhere else, that's not the point. Look at the fish. PFAS are cumulative, okay? No leachate has been disposed of in Newport since 2019, yet between 2010 and 2019, over 40 million gallons of untreated leachate were discharged, right? The fish have been absorbing the PFAS in the water, and they are the evidence of the PFAS pollution in the lake, as well as the measured amount, which I believe was 2.8 parts. I'm sorry. I don't want to quote when I do.
And actually, I appreciate your thoughts and perspective, but I also don't want to get in a back and forth right now on this. So thank you. One last question from Representative Pritchard.
I'm just curious, do we test all the tributary? It looks like there's over 100 water sources coming. Do we test all of them? And if so, are they all equal? Is there one that stands out above the others for contribution? I mean, it's got to be hard with so many.
Yeah, so from the watershed perspective, we have 3 large tributaries in Vermont and one medium-sized one, the Johns River, that we sample on a very regular basis, so we can calculate accurate loading going into the lake. Then we have about another maybe 6 to 8 of those smaller tributaries that we've sampled in Vermont, and I think up in Quebec, maybe they've sampled 20 or so of the smaller tributaries that flow into the lake. And by and large, those smaller tributaries, we have a couple that are a little bit higher, but nothing that like jumps out as like this is a really, really high level from those smaller tributaries. And in terms of the larger tributaries, we have the Black River that has slightly higher levels than the Barton River also is a little bit elevated versus the Clyde, where we have kind of the lowest levels coming in, mostly because there's a lot of lakes and ponds that filter out a lot of that pollution before it makes it down.
But you're testing for what specifically?
So this is testing for mostly phosphorus and a little bit of chloride and nitrogen and kind of total suspended solids. So those are the things we're sampling for. In terms of the PFAS and that, that's been pretty limited to a couple of the major tributaries. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah. All right. John, go ahead. Please keep it brief because we need to move on.
I will. Thank you for letting me. So if you could ask in the future, I don't expect the answer today, but to the members of DEC and the Agency of Natural Resources to list the positives and the negatives of dumping millions and millions and millions and millions of gallons of leachate in the future into Lake Memphremagog. And I think they're going to have a very hard time answering that question. But I would appreciate if you ask that question in the future to them.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you all for joining us on this topic this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
We will take a 5-minute break and come back at 5 minutes past the hour with our legislative council.
Thank you.